Hello and welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 76, brought to you by Wicked Tree Gear. Today I'm joined by Beau Martonik of East Meets West, and we're talking mountain bucks, Alaska trips, and elk hunts. So stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you all are doing well out there. The season is getting close, man. The nights are getting just a little cooler. We've actually had a little bit of cool weather roll through here in PA. I think the high this past weekend, or at least whenever I was home on Sunday, was like 79 degrees, and the evenings were getting dipping into those low 60s. So definitely getting the itch to get back into a tree stand, and it won't be long until all those things kind of come together. I hope everyone's caught up on their deer work, man. I know I got a few things to do. Fortunately, I did get my plots put in here. I think it was two weeks ago, maybe. I got the plots put in. I should be ready to rock and roll on the new property for this year. All my deer work is done for the most part. I'll probably do one last camera pull at the very beginning of September. Words, they're hard today. At the very beginning of September, just to kind of check in and see what has kind of shown up. That usually, on this property at least, it seems, shows up in that mid-August, late August to the beginning of September timeframe. So I'll do one last card pull there, and then we'll probably just let it set until October rolls around, and we'll be ready to rock and roll. And I do have a little bit of scouting to kind of wrap up. I got I think I mentioned in the last podcast, whenever we had, in the DIY report miniseries with Dan, the farm country, hunting wind in the farm country, I was talking a little bit about swamps on the upfront, where I got a new piece of property that I'll be scouting this weekend, probably on Sunday, to make my first sachet through that, since I got access to it just last week. And the reason I didn't scout it this past weekend is because I was in Ohio, making my second scouting trip of the year there to kind of get ready for that. Saw some stuff that I needed to see in one area, checked out a couple new spots. There's one more place that, I kind of looked at on the Onyx maps and kind of figured out that maybe I should be taking a look at this place, and upon further investigation, it seems like it could be a really good spot. It's water access. We'll talk about that. John and I'll probably do a catch up here at some point, and I'll talk a little bit more in detail about the trip overall out to Ohio and what my hopes, dreams, and aspirations are for this year. But today we got a really cool show. I got my buddy Beau Martonik on. For those of you that don't know Beau, he's got an East Meets West hunt podcast, and it's kind of focused on adventure hunting. Beau's a dude from Pennsylvania. He and I met, or just kind of ran into each other online, and then of course we ran into each other physically for just a brief second at ATA, and then we kind of reconnected at the Total Archery Challenge this year. And Beau's just a really cool dude, man. He hunts the way I think a lot of us like to hunt. He's a grinder. He hunts a lot of big woods, from around his hometown. He's a native I shouldn't say Pittsburgh, but a northern PA guy. And then he, of course, is all about adventure hunting, man. And a lot of what he's hunting is public land, whether it's whitetails or whether he's hunting elk. So he's a guy cut from a similar cloth to all of us, who just enjoys the hunt, enjoys adventure, and enjoys using public lands to do so, doing it on a DIY budget. So it's a really cool conversation with him. We touch a lot of different topics, everything from mountain bucks, that he's going after in PA, to elk hunts, and he went on a really cool trip to Alaska this past, I guess it was late spring, early summer maybe, that I definitely want to hear more about. So we'll talk all about those things. But before we jump on the phone with Beau, let's take a quick second to talk about our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. First and foremost, we are brought to you by Wicked Tree Gear, the longest lasting, fastest cutting, toughest tree trimming equipment you have ever used. Simply put, the toughest saws on earth. How tough are they? Tough enough to come with a lifetime warranty. And now, right now, when you visit wickedtreegear.com, use the promo code TRUTH at checkout and get a 20% discount on your Wicked purchase. We're also brought to you by Exodus Outdoor Gear. The new Exodus Trek is a byproduct of all consumer voices who've been excited about what Exodus trail cameras have to offer, but just can't fit a $200 camera in their budget, and that's okay. A budget-friendly camera backed by the industry's leading warranty is now here. The Trek is $145. Has the same proprietary shell design as the Lift series cameras, save 5-year warranty, 0.7-second trigger speed, photo, video, time-lapse, and hybrid modes, all with a single line backlit LED display. And you can get about 20,000 images on one set of lithium batteries, and I am putting that to the test this year by letting that bad boy soak. If you'd like to learn more about Exodus trail cameras, check them out at ExodusOutdoorGear.com. And if you like what you see, use the promo code TRUTH and save yourself $20 at checkout. We're also brought to you by Tecumani Seed. Everything's bigger in Texas. No matter if you live in the South, Midwest, or Northeast, Tecumani has your food plot seed needs covered. Visit Tecumani.com and check out their product selector tool to help pick the right seed for your food plot. Use the promo code TRUTH at checkout and save 20%. And we're also brought to you by Glacier Coolers, simply the world's finest. Whether you're hunting, camping, or fishing, you'll enjoy smarter design, stronger construction, and superior insulation of Glacier Coolers. Visit them at glaciercoolers.com. One last kind of one or two things to note. There will be an episode coming up in the very near future with my good friend Chad from Exodus. We'll have probably an announcement in the not so distant future that I'm looking forward to sharing with everybody. And then also on the topic of coolers, really bad transition there. But a buddy of mine actually was at an outdoor event, and just so happened to have a competitor, very expensive cooler, and a Glacier cooler side by side. They filled them both with ice and drinks for the day, and wouldn't you know it, the more budget-friendly Glacier cooler actually held ice much longer than the super expensive brand name cooler that you all probably know the name of, but we won't mention. So just a little food for thought. If you're thinking about a cooler, you might want to think about a Glacier. And with that, let's go ahead and get Beau on the line. All right, folks, welcome back. You are listening to another episode of the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast. And today I am joined by my good buddy, the man, the myth, the legend, the muscle behind the mustache, Beau Martonik. What's going on, brother?
Hey, man, what's going on, Clint?
Good, man. We finally got all the technical issues out of the way. You'd figure two guys that run a podcast could figure out how to manage to record one together, right?
Yeah, I feel like I come across these issues just about every time, and it's always something different, you know?
Exactly, man. It's like I still run into them all the time. Like the newest one was like I got a new computer, and so every time I connect, it seems to want to use a different microphone, and I have to kind of retrace where all like where the settings are set and like figure out which microphone it's picking up. It becomes like a disaster to where now I have to set up like a solid 15 minutes early before I start recording to make sure like nothing ridiculous happens. But
yeah,
we are here nonetheless, man. So what's going on out in the Berg, man? I know I'm catching you on the road. Where are you at?
I'm actually down in Southern Virginia this week. I'm down here working. There's a manufacturing plant that I have to visit once a month, come down here. So I'm sitting in beautiful Residence Inn in Waynesboro, Virginia right now, just enjoying the weather down here. And when I say that, I mean I drove through a ton of rain, wind, hail, just about everything else on the way down.
I hear you. Not the last time. My wife and I took a vacation. I think it was last year. So anytime my wife and so let me frame it this way. If I ever ask you to go somewhere with me on vacation for a trip, just say no, because you're going to have the worst weather you can possibly imagine. So 2 years ago, my wife and I were headed to the Carolinas to visit my dad, and the weather got terrible right around DC, and the wind's blowing, like people were pulling off the road, and I'm like, well, this is great. Like everyone's off the road, so I can just keep going. And we got to our hotel room wherever we stopped. At some point, it was somewhere in Virginia. I think we ended up staying overnight before we drove the rest of the way to my dad's. Looked on the news, and there was a tornado that basically traveled the path that I was driving because like the wind was like ridiculous. There was a bunch of hail. My wife kept saying, maybe you should pull over. I'm like, no, we're making great time because there's no traffic. And it just so happened like everyone else pulled off the road because they all knew that there was a tornado that was rolling through that I-95 corridor. And I just kept the hammer down and kept rolling.
Hey, that's the way to go. Just keep it at your back and you should be good.
That's right, man. That's how we do it in Pennsylvania, dude. You just drop the hammer and let it ride.
Yeah, exactly. It gives you a little bit of push to get down the highway quicker.
That's right. Well, cool, man. So I know you and I, we talk every so often, and you and I originally started just chatting over social media, and then we ran into each other at ATA. I know and then we got together out at the Total Archery Challenge and had a chat and hung out a little bit. And I held the fort down at your booth while you went and shot after it, so I could basically count my 3 arrows I had left after the day of shooting, because all I brought home was 3. So I sat at your booth with those 3 arrows, and I know a little bit about you. Of course, I know you're into mountain bucks, you're into adventure hunts. You will talk a little bit about your podcast, because you have a podcast that kind of talks about that. I know you went on a really rad trip this year, and I want to get to all of that. But before we start, just so everyone at home knows you as well as I do, if you wouldn't mind, give us a little bit of information about where you're from, your background, what you do for a living, and what the hell's going on with that mustache.
All right, Clint. Well, before we get into that, a little bit about me, let's talk about the first time. I guess I wouldn't really count ATA meeting you. I just kind of shook your hand there. Right. But yeah, Total Archery Challenge. We met up and we're like, hey, I want to podcast with you and everything for my platform. And then I was like, hey, do you mind just watching my booth for a second while I go shoot? My buddy's gonna come take over. You'll be fine. Well, little did I know that the Sitka course takes a little while to shoot.
A couple hours.
A couple hours. And my buddy was caught on his course longer than expected. So I had you stuck sitting in my booth with, people coming up asking questions about a business you didn't know anything about.
I was repping it though, dude. I was repping it hard. I had it all under control. It was all good.
Is that why I lost business?
That's exactly why you lost business.
No, but thank you for that. But anyways, so Clint, a little bit about myself. I'm from northern Pennsylvania. I'm from Elk County, Pennsylvania, the heart of the Allegheny National Forest, the only national forest in Pennsylvania, where most people have no idea where that's at, besides the fact that that's where the elk are. Right. So I grew up in that region. It's in the Appalachian region. So typically, mountainous, forested region, not too much there. Mm-hmm. And so I grew up, obviously, my whole life hunting and fishing from that standpoint. I mean, growing up in the middle of that beautiful place, that was what we did. And I grew up actually, getting into bow hunting really early. And it's been something that I just kind of fallen in love with. Started shooting a little bit of target archery when I was really young, like in some of the kids divisions there with my uncle, and really just got into the sport of archery hard. And like I said, my family is just really big into hunting and die hard into hunting what we consider mountain bucks. And at the time, I just thought it was deer hunting. I didn't know anything else about hunting, agriculture or farm country deer besides what I saw on TV. Right. So just to kind of give you that picture, where I hunt is heavily forested terrain. And so I grew up there hunting, like I said, and really been into it ever since. And when I went off to college, started hunting some different places, getting into it. And here I am now, 26 years old, and have really gotten into hunting as many different places as possible. And when I say that, it may sound like, this guy's got, money and everything else that he can go hunt. And that's not the case. I just travel around, hunt for the majority of it, public land, over the counter tags, and anywhere from Pennsylvania, Ohio, Colorado, and anywhere in between that I can, find the time and the place to hunt.
Yeah, man. I hear that, dude. Preach it. That's that was one of the things that, when we first kind of ran into each other online, the first thing was that we were both from Pennsylvania, so that we had that kind of in common. And then I had just kind of had that hunt in Ohio, which was, more kind of that mountain type of terrain. And I had Steve Flores on too from West Virginia, who's, he's big time, mountain buck hunter as well. And that was kind of what I think kind of started our kind of online friendship was just the idea that both interested in trying to find some tough terrain to hunt, appreciate the challenge. Same, we're very similar in the sense that, neither of us have a pile of money, but we try to figure out ways to get out and have the experiences that we want to have and do over the counter hunts and hunt public land and do all those things to be able to kind of have the experiences we want to have. I think it's interesting, man, that,
a lot of people probably don't realize or don't know that Pennsylvania has elk. I'm going to imagine. Like, what's your take on that? Do you, like, when I talk to people, like, it really never comes up. But I mean, Pennsylvania doesn't have a ton of elk, and it's near impossible to draw a tag. But they've got some hammer elk, like some giants.
Oh yeah, that's and you're right. Not a lot of people know about it, or if they do, they think it's, you know, this extremely small herd. Which I guess in the grand scheme of things, if you compare it to somewhere like Colorado, it's a very small herd. But it's very healthy in the growing herd in the north central region of Pennsylvania. And to be honest, they're some of the biggest bulls in the country. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The elk there are ridiculous, and you can see them. I mean, there's a lot of people that take like the tourist route and go up to Benezet. Is kind of the heart of elk country there, and you can see them. They're all over in the camp yards. There's big bulls bugling right up next to your car window. You know, it almost seems like a zoo. But there's a lot of areas that aren't right around that initial tourist area that elk live freely. They roam like they do anywhere else, and it's pretty cool to be able to see. But they are kind of, you know, in a relatively small area, I guess, because where I actually grew up is about 20 minutes from where the elk herd is, but there's no elk there. You know, there's not even a stray that goes there. So we didn't have them in our yard or anything along those lines, but 20-minute drive or even less than that, and you're in the middle of it. So it's kind of weird. I don't know what makes them just draw the line there, but they kind of have their range and they stick there.
Yeah, I'm sure it has something to do with, you know, whatever habitat is there and so on and so forth. You know, I mean, they probably have like where they like the winter and where they like the summer, and you know, they're, you know, creatures of habit. They'll do what they like to do until someone or something changes that. You know, do you ever get out and do any shed hunting there in the off season? Did you ever do that?
Yeah, we do every year. But the funny thing is, it took me a while to really get into it. Not until about 4 or 5 years ago did I start getting into it for elk sheds, and I still have not found one myself yet. Mm-hmm. And it's my family's done really well with it. My dad found a couple sheds off a bull this past year that would go over 400 inches. I mean, just big bulls. That's giant. But it's literally like, I think it's almost worse than the first day of rifle season in Pennsylvania. So if anyone knows what that's like, wow, then it's crazy. I mean, there's so many people, and they're everywhere. When you pull up to any spot, I mean, there's people at night, you know, they have night vision spotlights, shadowing the herds. I mean, they get into it. These antlers are prized possessions. So it's kind of an interesting, almost game, if you want to say, but it's super cool to see the sheds. I just say that I've had the worst luck out there with finding them. I can't find one if my life depended on it.
It sounds like you and I should shed hunt together is what it sounds like, because I cannot find a shed to save my life either. I'll be completely honest with you. I've yet to ever find a single shed antler.
Oh, really?
The shed antler that I have laying on my bar right now, an elk shed, I almost tripped over it when I was in Montana last year, and my buddy saw it, my buddy who lives there, and picked it up, and he was like, "Here, why don't you take this home?" So yeah, that was how I got my one lone shed antler. But
so I just real quick, I put on, like, between elk sheds and whitetail sheds last year, I logged over 140 miles of hiking.
Jeez.
And I found like 10 deer sheds, which isn't that great for the amount of, you know, terrain you're covering. And a lot of other people, but anyone that goes with me, they can find sheds. It's just, I literally think I can't see them, or I don't know what it is. But So yeah, you and I are on the same page.
Yeah. That's why I got a lab. I was like, I need someone to teach him how to shed hunt. That way I can take him out. Cause my problem is I gawk around, right? So I'm looking at all like the rubs and see if there's any scrapes from the previous year. And it's like, it's constantly a scouting mission for me. So, you know, my attention is usually diverted, and I'm not the most attentive to the sheds. My mind starts to wander, I guess you could say. But you know, I want to shift gears here real quick, man, because you had a trip this past spring. I want to say it was either spring or early summer, whichever we want to classify it as, and it made me extremely jealous. So You went to Alaska, right? So I guess just explain to everybody like what that trip was, like what it was for, and then we'll get into kind of the details of it. But I just want to get a sense of like how that trip kind of came about.
Yeah. So it was actually the first day of summer, June 21st is when I was up there. But I got this opportunity about a month and a half before that. So I do some work for a company called Heather's Choice, who makes healthy dehydrated meals for backcountry hunting or backpacking or anything along those lines. And Heather, who's the owner of the company, had reached out and said, hey, we're looking to do a company retreat and get everybody together up in Alaska, do a camping trip, a floating trip down the river, camp out at this glacier, all this amazing things. Would you be in? She asked my brother and I, and at first I'm like, I don't know if I can make that work, from a financial standpoint, from a, logistics standpoint, vacation from work, everything else. Right. And I called my brother up and was telling him about it and kind of being almost negative about the potential for it, thinking I wasn't going to be able to go. And he's like, why can't you go? And I was like, well, and he's like, just stop. You can go, make it work, figure it out. And I was like, all right, well, and he's actually going to Alaska in a couple weeks again for his honeymoon. So he really had to pull some strings to make it happen.
Oh yeah.
But, so anyways, him and I, booked our plane tickets literally that day and went up to Alaska and just camped the whole time. We didn't stay in a hotel or anything like that. Just flew into Anchorage, went down to Heather's house and just started the trip off there basically.
Nice. So she lives in Alaska. I take it her home is
yeah.
There. Yeah.
Yep.
So where did you flew into Anchorage? Is the company based out of Anchorage, or did you guys pontoon plane somewhere else to kind of start the trip, or how did that kind of start?
No, her company is based out of Anchorage, but she lives about 30 minutes south.
Okay.
Right along the Alaska Seaward. Mm-hmm. It's like the highway that runs down along there, like one of the only two highways in Alaska, yep. And runs along the coast. And so we flew into there and just did a quick hike, actually just outside of Anchorage. And we were walking down this trail, and a lady, kind of came up to us and was like, hey, are you guys hunters? I'm like, wow, apparently we come off that way pretty
right.
easily.
Right.
And I was like, yeah, why? And she's like, well, there's a grizzly bear chasing around a cow moose down the valley. And she's like, well, would you be able to shoot him? And I was like, well, I don't have a gun. And I don't know how, I guess maybe it was, as you alluded to earlier, the mustache and just kind of my look. Maybe that's what
the mustache was.
That I was a hunter.
The mustache was oozing masculinity. She was like, "This guy has to be a hunter."
Insane. No. But anyways, we walked down the trail, and my brother looked up on the hill. He goes, "Look at that!" He goes, "Is that a moose or what is it?" And of course, we didn't bring our binoculars. And looking up, and he goes, "That looks like a brown bear." And he's like, "I'm not saying it is until we can confirm it, whatever." So we kept walking down the trail. And another lady came up to us and said, hey, be careful. There was, a brown bear chasing around a calf moose down through this valley. So whether we actually saw it or not, I don't know. When we came back, the brown spot was not there. So I'd like to say that it was. So that was a pretty eye-opening experience saying, all right, we're not in Pennsylvania anymore.
Yeah, man, you definitely aren't in Kansas. That's for sure, man. When the brown bears are running around, when you have someone walking down the trail that you're getting ready to walk into saying, hey, be careful up there. There's a brown bear up there. It's like, that's a little unnerving. You know what I mean? That's one thing about hunting out west that always makes me a little unnerved. It's like, I'm not too proud to admit it. It's like, getting into bear country makes me nervous. You know what I mean?
Like,
it's just, yeah, I know, right? It's like, if you're not a little, you don't have a pulse. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
It's just, yeah, I don't know. It's like, I'm intrigued by them. It's like, just like how big they are and how powerful they are. And like they're apex predators. Like they're just super cool. And it's like, I like the idea of being in the area or in the same kind of, habitat or in the same kind of space with one. And when I say space, like within a reasonable distance, right? It's like, I'm not talking like cuddling with it. But there's still this, like, apprehension of like, man, I don't know. Cause I always have this dream, I guess, if I could say I had like one bucket list hunt, it's like, I would love to hunt brown bear with a bow. Like that's the one thing I would love to do. But there's also this part of me that's like, man, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, man, you got to get really close. You know what I mean? Like you got to like 30 yards tops. You know what I mean? Like you don't want to be any further away than that. And if that bear just has the right attitude, it's like, man, you could be in a world of hurt. You know what I mean?
Oh, definitely. And that's the same thing with me. I was like, I would love to hunt brown bear, and I've never hunted in a place that had them. And at first it used to kind of bother me thinking about it, but now, I don't know. I like it. You just need to be more aware, I guess, in the area. The thought of it just kind of makes me excited. Like when I was walking around the woods of Alaska, like just kind of jump back to that story real quick. We went down to Heather's house. We just set up a tent in the yard for the first night and everything. And we stayed there a couple nights. The last night that I was there, just to stay on the topic of the grizzly bears, it was daylight 24/7 there because it was summer solstice. So it never got dark, which is one of the weirdest things I ever experienced. And about 4 o'clock in the morning, I heard her dog barking, and I was like, I wonder if that's a bear. And I was like, you know what? I'm too tired. I haven't got much sleep at all. I'm just going to lay here. And what am I going to do about it if it is? So I just laid there in my teepee, and I was in a floorless shelter. And about 15 minutes later, I had to go up and I had to get up and go out and use the restroom. So I started walking out towards the wood line, did that, came back, started getting in my tent. And a little bit later, Heather's dad, who's the neighbor, came over and was like, hey, you guys had a visitor a little while ago. And I was like, yeah. Do you hear the dogs barking? Yeah, I did, and wasn't really sure what it was. He said, yeah, there's a big grizzly in the yard near your guys' tent. And I'm like, oh my, I'm like, geez. And then I went out into the woods, right after that, where, he was probably sitting there watching me thinking, I could take him if I wanted to, but I'll let him live another day.
Oh man. Yeah. See, it's that, dude, cause they're so stealthy too. It's like, you can't imagine like something that big being able to move around like that quietly.
No. And they had, one of the other neighbors was attacked by one the year prior. An older lady that would go out trail running, been doing it for 30 years behind her house. She got mauled by the same grizzly 3 times.
Jeez.
In one day.
That's pretty unfortunate.
Yeah. She lived, but man, jeez. That's when, like I said, you're not in Pennsylvania anymore, but yeah. So wild Alaska, let's put it that way.
Yeah, for sure, man. So, I mean, was this your first trip to Alaska, or have you ever been there before?
No, I've never been there. I have just kind of lived through experiences of listening to my grandfather used to be a smoke jumper in Alaska.
Cool.
So he would always tell stories and say how, awesome it was. He was back there in the 60s. So it was, even more wild then. But I just wanted to go so bad, and I need to go back. Yeah,
it's one of those places that I went 2002, I think 2002, 2003, something like that. I went on a bear hunt and black-tailed deer on Ketchikan, or Prince of Wales Island. We flew into Ketchikan and hunted on Prince of Wales, and it's one of those places. I've been only maybe a handful of places in my life where it's like the moment that I left, I needed to somehow figure out a way to get back. And Alaska is one of those places where it's like, just the flights alone are expensive and stuff like that. So it's not like, going to Colorado or Montana to hunt or whatever, where it's like you can make the drive and you have to take off some time from work, but it's not terribly cost prohibitive if you want to do it on the cheap, what I mean?
Yeah.
So you can get it done. Alaska, I'm not saying you can't hunt on a relatively cheap, you don't have to go with like the brown bear hunt that's going to cost you $35,000 or whatever. But, the thing with Alaska is that if you're non-resident, it has to be guided. Like you have to be with somebody. You know what I mean? Like I'm pretty sure it's that way in every part of Alaska, if I'm not mistaken.
And not for all species, actually.
No, it's not.
No, you can hunt black bear, and I'm not sure if it's every part of Alaska, but most parts you can hunt black bear, caribou, and moose, depending on the zones, without a guide.
See, that's the ticket right there.
So black bear is the ticket to get like the barrier of entry if you just want to experience Alaska.
Yeah.
In the area that we were in outside of Anchorage there in the Chugach State Forest, the residents were getting like, I think it was 4 or 5 bear tags, and the season never closes.
Oh, wow.
So it opens July 1st, closes June 30th. So it's literally a continuous season, almost like coyotes are, around here.
Right.
But, so that's a a reasonable barrier to entry. But I mean, if you're not experienced with it, it may be smart to have someone there with you that knows, because like we were just talking with the bear stories and everything else, and the weather too.
Yeah.
Alaska is as wild as it gets.
Yeah. We went. It was a black bear hunt that we went on that whatever that year that was 2003, and it was like the weather was just nasty. Unpredictable at best. And, we were hunting. So what we were hunting was what you would call semi-guided or whatever, where basically the guy had a place that we were staying. And he basically just gave us vehicles and was like, if you want me to go with you, I'll go with you. If not, no big deal. Technically, I think the way it was, because we were staying there was some like weird stipulation that he had to guide us if we were staying at his facility or something like that. It was something odd, but he was like, if you guys don't want me to go, I won't. I don't need to tag along. I'll just kind of point to a map and you guys can go do whatever you want to do. And I was with my dad and my uncle, and that's what they wanted to do. They just kind of wanted to go, which is kind of, they grew up in the woods and are a good woodsman and stuff like that. And I was like maybe 21, 22, something like that, and just wandering, bumbling around the wilderness of Alaska.
Which isn't it? That's crazy though. I mean, yeah. I didn't know that you'd went there before. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was. And the funny thing was like, so I had been living in Orlando for a little while. I actually hadn't hunted in a couple years because I'd moved away and I was doing the music stuff or whatever. And my dad was like, "Hey, let's go to Alaska," and I was like, "Cool, let's do it." And we went and we would split up and like, I don't know that I even had like a compass or a GPS or anything. I just was like, just young and stupid. I was like, cool, here's my gun. I'm going to go walk in here. It's like you just you just take off and walk or whatever. And like my fail safe was like, I just tried to always hunt near like a stream or something.
Yeah.
That way it's like if I could find the stream, I could find my way back. Had a dicey moment where I got a little too close to a mama bear with cubs. It got a little weird. And, yeah, that was close to the end of the trip, which was probably a good thing, because after that, it was I was a little bit more nervous walking into the woods after that. But
yeah, every stick that breaks, you snapping your neck, looking back. What was that?
Yeah, exactly. There's nothing. I mean, the thing was too, man. It's like that place specifically on Prince of Wales. It's, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's considered technically a rainforest because it gets, I think, nearly an inch of rain a day. Like on average.
Jeez.
So
yeah.
The timber is like walking through a jungle. Like it'll take you hours to walk like a quarter of a mile. It's like just because it's so thick. Like you have to like almost like pull stuff out of your way to walk through. It's ridiculous. So it's so easy like to walk just like 20 yards off of a road, and there were no paved roads there. You walk 20 yards off the road where you park like your vehicle or whatever, and you walk in to hunt. You walk in 20 yards, you turn around like to look at something, and you'll have lost where you've come in at because everything looks exactly the same.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So it was just very unnerving being in there and not being able to see very far in front of you either. Like you don't have a lot of perception, around. You don't have a lot of context to what's going on around you. You can see, the 10 feet in front of you, and that's about it, But on to more about your trip, man. I want to hear a little bit more about yours. So for me, when I left, it was, I had a distinct feeling about what I had just experienced, right? And so I'm curious if with you, was there any one thing or any one feeling or any one thing that you experienced, or just an overall feeling that you're leaving with that kind of has been sticking with you? And I'll tell you what mine was.
As far as like one specific experience that I had that's sticking with me,
well,
just like an overall feeling after the trip.
Yeah, either one. You know what I mean? It's like either the impact that it had on you as a whole, or like a specific moment that you had an experience that was super impactful. It's just going to kind of stick with you, like your overall feeling about Alaska from this trip.
So there's kind of two ways I guess I could look at this. The one would be is I was kind of put into a scenario that I'm not used to being in, and that was being around quite a few non-hunters on the trip. And this doesn't exactly answer your question, but I was around a lot of non-hunters on the camping part of the trip, whether it was the ambassadors that are in Heather's Choice, the employees, and then also some of the other ambassadors that are from dog sled racing, from, hikers to backcountry skiers. I mean, all these different avenues, and being able to talk to them from that, perspective of, educating them on hunting and the question that, that even myself, I have trouble coming up with words to describe, why you hunt and everything along those lines. And talking with them about that and listening to their views and everything was really eye-opening to me, and realizing that I need to make sure with everything that I do that I'm putting hunting in a positive light. Mm-hmm. So that was from a trip and a culture perspective. That was one thing that I noticed and took away from that trip. But from an experience standpoint, it was just once you got up there and realized that even though it seemed so daunting to be there and to travel there and all the flights and everything else, that anything is possible. You can get to anywhere in the world if you want to do it. And it just makes me long for more, different adventures like that, whether that's through hunting or whether that's through just traveling like that. It was the remoteness of Alaska and being back in there just kind of really brought me back to kind of your true self. And I don't know, it's really tough to put into words for me, but it was something when I came back, I felt rejuvenated and just wanting to have more and more experiences like that and just live my life through a series of those experiences.
I think you hit on it right there, man, when you said I have a hard time putting it into words, because that's exactly kind of the impact that place has, right? It's just it's just never ending, like, beauty and the best. It's like all the best parts of like what the U.S. has to offer in terms of like land and majestic landscape and wildlife and all that stuff. It's like, it's all there. You know what I mean? And like the thing that I walked away with, and I have a follow-up question I want to ask you, but like the thing that I walked away with was some of the places where I was walking, right? You just kind of wondered, like, am I the first person to ever walk here? You know what I mean? And that's like a super profound kind of like moment when you recognize that I might be the first human to actually touch this part of the soil. You know what I mean? Because you don't get that anywhere else, really. I mean, you can go to Montana and Colorado, and you can get into some remote places, and there's, the idea that could happen as well, But there, I mean, it's just, it's just there's just not really any people, and there's just like so much land. You know what I mean? And it's just, and it's still, just to your point, what you were saying earlier, man, it's just extremely wild. You know what I mean? Like there's just nothing that compares to it. But I want to ask you. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to add to that, and for me, like I touched on real quickly earlier, was hearing those stories from my my grandfather that's 82 years old now, listening to him talk about so passionately about Alaska and how wild it was when he was fighting fires up there and doing everything. Like, it just almost, I don't know, it was just like a surreal feeling when you're just, immersed in it. And we're just, I was standing there at 2 a.m. It was still daylight, just looking out at this glacier lake, with no one else around. And it was just, like you said, again, I'm having trouble putting it into words, but anyone that gets a chance to experience that. And I guess when you say get a chance, I mean, you kind of got to make the opportunities. Yeah.
Yeah.
But,
sure.
Anyways, that's my thought on that.
Nice. So I'm curious, man, the conversation you had with some of the Heather's Choice ambassadors and, the folks that you were on the trip with and stuff like that, you were mentioning that they're, non-hunters and so forth. I'm just curious, how was the conversation, or how were you kind of received in your discussions? I mean, do you guys have, discussions, particularly about hunting, and how did they kind of receive your message, so to speak?
Yeah, so one person is specifically Kayleen, who is the marketing director for Heather's Choice, and she lives out of Colorado actually. But prior to Heather's Choice, she had zero exposure to hunters, really. I think she's from Indiana regularly and then moved out to Colorado and just was into hiking and all that other stuff, but never was. She just pictured, the Elmer Fudd type, hunter
Right.
and that was what she thought hunting was. And, people just shooting deer out of windows and everything else and never really got that perspective. So, and she's very educated and was asking a lot of questions. And through working with her in the last year or so, she said her eyes have been open to hunting. And she's like, I'm not necessarily sure that I want to hunt myself, but I understand it. And like the questions, asking around just, we want, whether that's, there's always the meat argument, about, having clean organic meat, and that's great. But the whole adventure aspect behind it too is, for people to say that it's 100% about meat, I think you'd kind of lying to yourself.
Right.
By saying that. Obviously love meat. It's a very important part of it, but that whole, when you immerse yourself in that environment, I just really tried to explain to them what it's like, if you go hiking and everything like that, it's awesome and you get to experience nature. But with hunting, you're trying to figure out these animals every move. Mm-hmm. And when you put yourself, whether it's in the backcountry or it's a tree stand, you're really just paying attention to little things. The stuff that your job that's stressing you out isn't bothering you right now. You're focused on hunting. You're focused on trying to outsmart an animal that spends their whole lives trying to survive.
Yeah.
And just really kind of got into that aspect with them and got a lot of positive feedback from those people. And actually afterwards, there was a couple of posts on social media from them thanking us for, discussing that with them. And it wasn't just me. There was myself and then two other hunters that were from Alaska that were also very good with explaining that type of stuff and why they do it. Right. And how they do it. And I think that, whether those people ever hunt or if they don't, I hope that they were left with a positive, outlook on it and outlook of hunters as a whole.
Right. Well, I think, it's the way I always kind of explain it is, and you did a great job kind of like expressing it, man. It's like, you're right. It's not just about the protein. It's a huge component of it, because I like that, like that aspect of it. But for me, when you talk about like as a non-consumptive, outdoors person, hiker, camper, skier, whatever it is, you are observing nature. And what I like to say is, as a hunter, you move from observer to participant, to where I'm now taking an active role and I've left my kind of human life behind to a degree and have inserted myself into this other world that exists kind of sans human, so to speak. And the analogy I kind of use for people when I explain it is like, everyone, for the most part, most people, I'll say, not everyone, but majority of people have gone to a concert, a rock concert, country concert, whatever, of their favorite band, artist, whatever. And there has to be a moment when you're watching this, especially if it's like your favorite band, where it's like you're envisioning yourself as that person playing on stage. Like you're envisioning like wouldn't it be so cool if I was the guitar player in this band or the drummer in this band? That is you trying to make the transition from observer to participant. You know what I mean? And that same, like, how cool that feeling would be to be able to do that is the same thing that you have like as a hunter when you move from that observer to the participation role. It's like you got into the band, like you're in Led Zeppelin. You know what I mean?
I'm with the band.
Yeah, totally with the band. You got the T-shirt and everything. You know what I mean? But that's kind of like the way I always kind of explain it. It's like, because I know like all my favorite bands growing up as a kid, man. It's like I would go watch them and I'm just sitting there going, man, I only wish I could be that guitar player right now. You know what I mean? Because like you just want that full immersion, the full experience. You know what I mean? And that to me is kind of like what hunting is like in taking in the outdoors. I'm happy to go for a hike and observe it, but man, it's a lot cooler when I get to participate.
You know what? I'm gonna have to steal that from you. Any next time that I get into a conversation like that, I'm gonna use that analogy. That was good.
Do it, man. Become the Led Zeppelin, become Jimmy Page, become Robert Plant. Just not John Bonham, because you'll wake up in a bathtub choking on your own vomit. It's not a good look for anybody. So cool, man. Well, hey, let's do I'm going to do a hard transition here with zero segue, because I want to get to talk into some elk hunting, man. So I want. Well, first, let me ask you here: Are you going out west this year? Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure you are.
Before we continue our conversation, let's talk about Wicked Tree Gear saws. Hardcore deer hunters need tools that can keep up. We don't baby our gear, taking on whatever Mother Nature dishes out. Check out Wicked Tree Gear hand saws and pole saws at wickedtreegear.com. Use the promo code TRUTH to save yourself 20% on your next purchase with free ground shipping, and get a saw that's tough enough to work as hard as you hunt.
Yeah, I'm going out west here in less than a month now. Heading out chasing elk in Colorado.
Nice. So how are your preparations coming?
Good. I'm feeling really confident going into this year. I'm a little behind on the gear perspective of getting I'd like to have my bag kind of packed by now, at least to know what I still need and some differences. Luckily, this is my third year in a row going out there, so I kind of have a better grasp than I did in the past. Mm-hmm. But I've been doing a lot of traveling for work, so I'm a little behind on that aspect, but I feel pretty comfortable, a lot more confident in the past with my shooting and also physical fitness, as well as just elk hunting knowledge. I've been really just studying up on that quite a bit to try to prepare for it. So I cannot wait to go back out this year.
Nice. So when you go, is this of course it's over the counter, it's public land. Is this like a backcountry style hunt where you're kind of packing everything in and kind of wandering in the mountains and setting up a base camp, or do you have a specific place that you're staying? Like how are you kind of facilitating the hunt?
Wandering is a very good way of putting how I elk hunt.
Man, I think anyone who says that they do anything other than that are just lying.
They're 100% lying. Even the best ones will tell you that.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure even Corey Jacobson, I'm sure, wanders sometimes.
Yeah, you have to. But I get distracted too easily with that. But right. Anyways, yeah. So it is a backcountry style hunt. So the last couple of years, I just put everything on my back and backpacked into a wilderness area for 7 days. Just everything that I needed for those 7 days was on my back. And I think it was about around 4 miles in is where we'd set up base camp and would hunt out of there. And, if we hunted the areas in that general area, usually hike between like 10 and 12 miles a day. Mm-hmm. And if we weren't getting into any elk, then we pick up base camp and kind of move it. So it was, still kind of mobile with that, with a backcountry style hunt. But this year, this is very recent, and I hadn't even talked to you outside about this, Clint, but I'm going with a group of guys this year that are bringing horses out from Pennsylvania. Awesome. So we're not riding the horses, but they are going to help us pack in our gear. And we're going to pack in, I think they said somewhere 8 or 9 miles we're going back in. This is even a new area for me. I was planning on going back to my same spot, and this opportunity kind of came up, and just, again, as we were talking about before, something different, seeing a different area, different style just had me, kind of hooked on it. So we're going back in, and we're going to set up a base camp there. And then hunt out of that with, I'll still carry a lightweight tent with me in case I, get into elk ways from the tent. I can kind of bivvy out for the night, meaning just, setting up the tent and sleeping wherever I end up when it gets dark. And, but yeah, that's going to be the case this year. So,
man, that is going to be awesome with horses, man. That's going to be killer, dude. I mean, that just gives you that much more opportunity. Did you hear that? My dog thinks it's going to be awesome too. He's totally crashed out right now on the floor right next to me. He has he gets a little weird and a little freaky. So he's got these puppy calm pills that we give him, which are I don't know, they're like hemp seed oil or something like that. I call it doggy weed. and
CBD oil.
Yeah, it basically lets him like relax, so he's not all like high strung and like want to freak out, because he's a little high strung. Anyway, taking the Colorado maybe is what made me think of it. The hippies. I got a hippie dog right now, so
Yeah.
the taking the horse is going to be awesome, man. Like, just I can't imagine like how much that's going to kind of open up like the opportunities with being able to pack that much further in, and take the requisite gear needed to do that.
Yeah.
And then also, man, that the pack out, what I mean? Like, hopefully you guys kill a couple elk. It'd be nice to have the horses to help pack that stuff out for sure.
Oh yeah. I mean, like that just opens it up. Like, so instead of me, and I've been criticized for my pack weight before, but it was like 72 pounds, including my boat, which was including my bow and water, food, everything last year.
Right.
Just pretty heavy to pack back in, and to be able to distribute that weight with the horses. And so I think we'll have like 2 horses for 4 guys, and still have something on our back, but not nearly as much. And then, like you said, not if, but when we come out heavy, I'm being extremely confident in this year, right? So, like we said, the power of the rut stash, but gonna go in, come out heavy, and the horses will help. You even carrying our camp gear and everything else. So that's really cool. I haven't experienced this type of hunt yet, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Nice. As far as, I know when we've talked in the past, we both like to work out. We both like to stay in shape. And, I think for both of us, it's more of a lifestyle type of thing that we both want to stay in good shape. It also helps us in difficult hunts. It makes everything a little easier if you're, if you have good cardio and your strength is up to par and stuff like that. So I'm just curious, what all are you kind of doing specifically to kind of get ready for a Western hunt?
Yeah, so I used to be a guy that went to the gym a lot and was really into that. Just liked working out. Again, like you and I talked before, with just the overall healthy lifestyle. But I kind of switched those gears a little bit. After going out west the first year, I realized that, so I was okay with cardio. I wasn't terrible with it. Could still use some improvement. My strength was decent. I was doing a lot of lifting and things along those lines, but like my quick bursts, if I needed like a high amount of energy in a short amount of time, which would happen if, say, an elk bugled and you had to run over, you had to move on position, and you're in that thin air, that's tough. Mm-hmm. So I've kind of changed my whole workout plan around being mobile. Mm-hmm. So as well as I'd mentioned a little bit earlier, I travel a lot. So I have nothing but kettlebells, some sandbags that I've made out of play sand that I picked up at Home Depot, and put them in some dry bags. So I have like 50-pound, 30-pound sandbags, some kettlebells, and I built a step-up box. So basically a box that's, I think it's 18 inches off the ground, that I can use to practice stepping up on, mimicking being in the mountains, because not all the time do I have access or the time to go drive somewhere and then hike. Right. So I'll take the sandbag, put it in my backpack, and do a bunch of step ups on there, which helps build up the hip flexors, all your muscles in your legs, your lower back, your core. And even though it's really boring to just step up on a box over and over again, it is extremely effective in my opinion. And I kind of started doing everything in a circuit motion. So my workouts are short. I get up at 4:30 in the morning to do these workouts before work, and usually they're only anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes, and just do a lot of high rep, high intensity stuff in a short amount of time. So a lot of things that are using full body movements, like kettlebell swings, squats, there's air squats, lunges, jumping squats, the step ups. And then a lot of times in between my sets, I'll just do a sprint and come back. And that sprinting is what's really helped me with that. When you need to go right now, you need to, like you said, that bugle, he's right there and the wind's about to switch. You need to get up around him, whatever it may be. That, that fast twitch type muscle movement has really helped me out a lot. But if I could give like a recommendation of one thing to do, it's definitely have that pack on and go for a hike.
Yeah.
You know, with weight in it too, kind of to mimic that. But I like to do an overall body workout. I do some trail running as well, but just overall body movements, focusing on my legs, core, and back mostly, but for the overall body.
Yeah, we have a similar kind of workout regimen because I do similar exercises. It's more, I guess, what I would call, functional strength. I don't lift a ton of heavy weight. I'll wear a weighted vest when I work out and stuff like that. But it's a lot of like fight training type of stuff. So everything I'm doing with like a dumbbell in hand and, odd body positions. So you're kind of, balanced and strong whenever you're in your when you're in maybe your most vulnerable kind of body positions and stuff like that. Yeah. And then, last year, the thing that helped me the most, man, in all honesty, was I started doing marathon sprint training where I was doing like interval sprints. So I would run like, whatever it was, I would sprint 800 meters, and then I'd walk 800 meters. I'd sprint 800 meters and walk it, then sprint 800 meters and walk, then sprint 800 meters and walk it. And then I would sprint 400 meters, walk 400, sprint 400. I would do a set of those, like 4 of them. And then after that, I would basically do 200 meter sprints for, I think it was like 15 minutes straight. Like a 200 meter sprint, 10-second rest, 200 meter sprint, 10-second rest. And I would do that. And the whole workout would take me like maybe 25 minutes, 30 minutes. You know what I mean? But you were just torched afterwards. And that was like a game changer for me, man. Because when I started doing that, it's like my cardio went through the roof. And when I hit Montana last year, it was like the first day I could tell a difference in the air. But after that, it was like I was good to go. What I mean? Like no problems whatsoever. Like it didn't really bother me. And that would be my one recommendation to anybody that's going out west. Is like, and this is the thing, man. It's like you don't have to be in great shape. You know what I mean? Like I don't want anyone out there listening to think that like you got to be some world beater, triathlete to go hunt elk, because that's not the case. You know what I mean? It's like it all depends on what type of experience you want and what type of hunt you're going to do.
Oh yeah, I mean you can gear that to however you'd like and your hunting style. For me, it's just like I like. Okay, so I sit so long in the deer stand that when I hunt elk, I want to move. Yeah. So I'm moving, I'm bugling, and that's what I'm doing. I'm running ridges that way. So I like to be in shape with it. Do you need to be in the best shape? Like you said, absolutely not. But I can promise you that no matter what, you're not going to wish that you weren't in as good a shape as you were. You know what I mean? I mean, you are going to hit points where you're like, man, I shouldn't have slept in that day and should have got up and did that one extra, whatever. But the sprints, like you're saying, that's so helpful to be able to do. And my thought on the fitness side of it, and whether it's, end all be all with elk hunting or not, it's debatable, but it does, bring that overall healthy lifestyle that really helps out. So
yeah, for sure. So I want to talk a little bit here about, because this seems like a perfect time to talk a little bit about East Meets West, your podcast and your platform, because a lot of it, if I'm not mistaken, I'll ask it this way. Where did this idea come from, and where was the podcast and East Meets West kind of born from?
Yeah, so I first went out west in 2016 and just kind of went out on a whim, planned this adventure with my brother and my cousin, and just dove in headfirst with it. And when I started doing the researching for it and trying to look into how to make this hunt possible, I realized that it was tough when you had no context on or concept of Western hunting and the terminology used and all these different things. So anyways, I, somewhat figured it out, I guess, enough to be able to go, went out and hunted, and I documented the whole thing. Well, one by video, that was kind of a half-assed video, but my brother edited it pretty good for my video quality. But anyways, and then I wrote it all down. So I was never I kind of like to, write and everything in high school and college, but I never did anything like that ever after that. Well, so I wrote a story, kind of a day by day thing of my elk hunt and like the feelings that I had throughout the hunt, and how, there were certain days where I was just like, I wanted to quit and I wanted to go home. I was like, this sucks. I'm beat down. I can't find the elk now. What's going on? Why am I here? I'm taking vacation. I should be at the beach or doing something like normal people do.
Right.
But anyways, I wrote this story and I submitted it to a publication online called the Journal of Mountain Hunting, and they ended up running it in their subscriber story section. And I titled it East Meets West, and I got a lot of feedback from it from people, throughout the East, being like, hey, I'd love to do that, but they use but.
Right.
But this or but that, or, all these excuses. And I'm thinking, they weren't valid excuses. I mean, I understand where they're coming from with it, but there's, an answer to any one of those excuses. So anyways, the idea was kind of in my head, the East meets West. I just thought that sounded cool. And I started doing some more writing on that whole aspect, and ended up becoming a field editor for the Journal of Mountain Hunting, as well as writing for other publications on planning Western hunts and doing things. And just as a side note here, I do not want to sound like I am an elk hunting expert, because I am absolutely not, and have not killed an elk. So I can help plan a hunt.
Right.
But, as far as the killing part, I'm not going to comment on that.
Right.
But just the whole idea of it, adventure style hunting, whether that's going out to Colorado, or if that's going to Ohio, or the big woods of Pennsylvania, or wherever that is, you kind of can define your own adventure with that. So came up, and I started listening to podcasts and everything else about leaving before I went out west. But I always liked that idea. It was like, man, I wish I could come up with a, way of reaching people and talking about this, adventure style hunting from the East. And for one, so I can learn more about it from talking to these guests, but might as well throw a microphone on and help other people out with it. So after this last season here in 2017, I was like, I need to kind of go forward with this podcast and make it a resource for the guys in the Eastern U.S. to plan and realize that it's possible to go on these adventure style hunts, and that can be scaled however you want. That can be a sheep hunt in Canada, that can be a DIY elk hunt in Colorado, or that can be a whitetail hunt in Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. It's just, and my slogan is, how do you define adventure? And that's kind of what I'm getting at. It's just, you determine what you want in your experience, and don't let anything get in your way of doing that. So I want to be that resource to be able to help people plan those type of hunts. And so I started the podcast, an online journal, as well as an apparel company that's all surrounded by that concept.
Nice, man. That's awesome, dude. And it's super cool, man. Like, it's like I'd mentioned at the top, the way you and I met online and stuff like that. And we've had a ton of conversations about, different things, and, in the outdoor world, hunting, sometimes podcasting, and, it's, and you're right, man. It's a cool thing that you can help people, kind of be able to realize the opportunities that they have. I'll say this, man. I hunted most of my life growing up, or since I was a kid. And it wasn't until I started, finally, I guess, let me say it this way, got the stones to just say, you know what, screw it. I'm going to start traveling to different places and hunt, because I just want to see different stuff,
Yeah.
My satisfaction for hunting, and I love it regardless, but just going somewhere new and hunting, even if I come home empty-handed and I eat a tag, it's so worth it. So worth it. It's like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, you have this sense of achievement, what I mean? Because it's not easy. I won't say that it's not easy to do, but it takes some planning. It takes a little forethought. It takes a little bit, I'm going to go do this type of thing. And so when you do it, you kind of have this like sense of like, yeah, I just did something. I did something that a lot of other people probably won't do. As you mentioned, they'll make excuses for why they can't.
And you know what, Clinton, that's another thing that I didn't touch on there with the business, but has been a huge part of it. And the reasoning for it was when I did this type of hunt, and like you said, it's once you look back at it, it's not as hard to plan something like that and do it as it is. It's more of a, committing to it and blocking out the time to do it. But in that process, there's a lot of really hard things. And as I say a lot with elk hunting, it's type 2 fun. It's fun to talk about it afterwards, but during the time, a lot of it's, it can be miserable.
Yeah.
I mean, you're wore out, you're beat down, the weather's, just can be nasty. And what that did though, for me, was it helped me in all aspects of my life. Things that I thought were big deals when I'd come back, I wasn't complaining about, this or that or the weather or something at work, things that I used to, complain about with the first world problems that we have. It just made me look at things differently. When you're worried about, when you're in the backcountry and your whole day is surrounded by supplying your body with food, figuring out how you're going to do that, how you're going to find water to drink, how you're going to hydrate yourself, how you're looking for the elk, and you're doing that and you simplify things that much, all the little problems in your life aren't that big of a deal. And when you plan these different type of hunts like that, it helps you in all aspects of your life. And I wholeheartedly believe in that. And that's why I keep putting myself outside of my comfort zone. And that's what I think, with growing and how I would, define adventure on that side of things would be getting out of your comfort zone, trying different things. And it's just led me down so many different paths in the last, 2.5, 3 years that I can't even, begin to get into it completely. It just helps you out in every aspect of your life. And I know you and I have talked about that, but it's something that I'd urge anyone that they get a chance and again, make that chance to happen, to go on a different style of hunt, get outside your comfort zone, wherever that may be.
Yeah, no, 100% agree, man. Like it's funny you mentioned the comforts of home and, when you're in that kind of mode of just one foot in front of the other and what do I need to do to get through today type of approach, how much it kind of changes and level sets your mind. What I had told someone whenever I came back from last year's hunt, they asked, basically they asked what it was like. And I said, there's not much that's more humbling than shitting in the woods like an animal for 2 weeks straight. I was like, cause I was like, for 2 weeks, I was like, I didn't have a bathroom. It
sucks.
You know what I mean? I was like, it was what it was. And then, I went to Ohio with my buddy Chad and we slept in the back of a pull behind cargo trailer. You know what I mean? That was our sleeping quarters for that, 8-9 day hunt we did in Southern Ohio. And again, I went to the bathroom every day in the woods for like 9 days. You know what I mean? I was like, when that is like, cause that's kind of like it's like one of those creature comforts that you have when that's kind of taken away. And it's like, at that point, there's not much separating you from the animal. You know what I mean? Like everything now has become equal. We use the same restroom. We were using the same lands. We were finding the same water sources, like all the same. We're using all the same stuff.
Besides, you look a little more awkward doing it than they do.
Totally look more. They do it. They do it like it's nothing. They do it and keep walking. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like,
yeah. You got to hang off a tree backwards, upside down, and everything else.
Exactly. But I want to ask you this question, man, because this is something that I know for me, it's been extremely helpful and useful to me, and I've learned a ton, just in running a podcast. Not just from hunting, but just like all kinds of stuff from people and met super cool people and stuff like that. So I'm just curious, the amount of time you've been podcasting and doing this type of stuff, what are some things that now that you wouldn't otherwise know if you didn't have the opportunities that you've had in the outdoor, what I'll call the outdoor industry, or what are some things that you wouldn't have done or known if it weren't for the podcast?
Well, with the podcast is, relatively new. I've only had it out for a couple months, but in that amount of time, it feels like it's been a year. But the biggest thing that I realized was that there are so many more people that are like-minded than I could have ever imagined, from anywhere from Virginia to Pennsylvania, New York, Ohio, West Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina. I mean, the whole way up and down the East Coast. there's a lot of people like us that love that adventure style of hunting. And I've had some great conversations with these people that I would never have had the opportunity to talk to without the platform of the podcast. So that's been kind of the biggest thing for me to really talk about. And then if you go into like specific details with, so I got to talk to Corey Jacobson, the 10 times world elk calling champion, on my podcast about, calling elk in certain scenarios. I got to ask him questions about certain setups I had and what I was doing. Why did that not work? And why did the elk blow out when I was trying to shoot them and everything else? And just being able to have that voice and do that has been so eye opening for me. And, that's been the biggest thing. And I just hope to continue with it, to be able to get to meet more people, and, hopefully hunt with a lot of these, people like yourself and others that I've talked to that are, have similar mindsets to me and just, help each other out in any way possible.
Yeah, that's the one thing. I think you hit the nail on the head, man. It's like, this is a very helpful community. It's the hunting community in general. And then I think, and then when you get into like the adventure style, it's like, it's the adventure, I feel like the folks who are, those who seek adventure just in general are less interested or less focused on the prize at the end and more about the process and the experience. So there's really no winning or losing, so to speak, right? Because sometimes, hunting, whitetails in your hometown or whatever, it's like, folks, and look, I'm guilty of it too. You like start to think certain deer are yours because you saw them here on this camera or whatever. You know what I mean? So a buddy shoots a deer. A buddy shoots a deer, and you want to be happy for him, and you are. But there's always still that little party that's kind of like, damn, man, I had that deer on camera for 3 years. You know what I mean? Like I wish you know what I mean? There's that like little bit of it. Like there's a little bit of that. There's a win at the end, and I'm not sure why necessarily. I'm not saying everybody's that way, and I'm not even saying that it's wrong. We're human. You have these feelings and these ideas, but it feels like the adventure hunt thing. It's like it's so much about the experience and the process that you're almost hopeful that someone will ask for your help. Because you just want to share that experience. You just want to share some stuff where hopefully someone can take it and go have the same type of cool experience that you had. You know what I mean? Because that's really the win at the end of it. Like it's not the animal per se. It's winning like winning at the type 2 fun, like you said. You know what I mean? It's making cool stories. Yeah,
and like in hearing from people that give me feedback, shooting me messages saying like, oh, I was listening to it, and I'm gonna drive from Maine out to Colorado. I'm like, from Maine, that's double, that's even crazier,
right?
To go hunt Colorado for the first time or hunt Montana or wherever that may be. Like you said, when you hear that, I'm like, if they have a positive experience out of that, and I had even just 1% of, reasoning by them doing it, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And hearing that, I just was never, I guess going into it, I just didn't expect that to happen. And happen so quickly from that, find that those kind of people that were so into it. And I guess, do you feel the same way with that?
Yeah. I mean, it's always
podcasting.
Yeah, for sure, man. I mean, it's always extremely humbling when you get a message saying, there was one guy in particular, I remember last year shot me a message saying he had started listening to the show and, was picking some stuff up from probably, the guests more so than me or, from me or John, it was more so the guests that we had on, I'm sure. But yeah. They shot their first buck with a bow or something like that last year. And I got a message from them and they said that they had heard stuff on the podcast that they used and they said it was in part because of what they had learned listening to the podcast. And I was like, dude, that is awesome. But that was all you. You know what I mean? Like you had to do the work. You had to, put all the puzzle pieces together and stuff like that. It's like, I'm glad you were able to listen to some, whatever, mumbo jumbo we were spewing at whatever time, and I'm glad that it helped, but in no way can I take credit, for that. And one guy was like, I'm seeing more deer now than I've used to see, in the past or whatever. It's just like stories like that. You're like, man, if I helped at all, then awesome. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely.
But more than anything, I think we probably just gave you an outlet for some place to like have some time to think about it. Like, cause that's what I've found. Like, you know, if you just have time to like think about something, like something specific that you're trying to solve, like you'll come up with a solution. It might not work the first time, but you'll refine it and you'll continue to refine it and you'll continue to refine it. You know, I feel like podcasts to a degree, because I listen to a lot of entrepreneurial podcasts too, like business podcasts and stuff. And a lot of times it's like, I'll be listening to those shows and I'm not even like listening to the words that they're saying, but like it's got my mind in a way of thinking that I start like taking business things that I'm thinking about and I start kind of building them or tearing them apart, deconstructing them and reshaping them in my mind as I'm listening to the show. So I kind of feel the same way about like, you know, the Truth from the Stand podcast, where it's like, we have guests on that are extremely knowledgeable and they have great information, you know, like, you know, just a bunch of folks who've been, you know, kind enough to come on and talk to us, you know, but more than anything, it's like, I really feel like I'm just giving you that hour to sit and think about deer hunting, you know what I mean? Or Western hunting, or taking a trip to Alaska, or whatever it is. Like the time that you don't get to spend doing that because you're working or you're watching the kids or you're doing whatever. It's like, this is like your hour to sit and think about the stuff you want to think about. And then your mind kind of takes over and starts solving those problems that you have, or starts scenario planning to create a better hunt. You know, so that's kind of how I think about it. So I'm like, I don't take any credit for it. I gave you an hour window to think about something you really like and you'll figure it out.
You know, that's a really good way of looking at it. I've never thought of it that way, but you know, even as you're saying that to me, I'm thinking on the drive down here to Virginia, at a 5-hour drive, and I'm listening to podcasts, and actually only one of them out of the 5 hours was anything to do with hunting. Mm-hmm. And I listened to a lot of entrepreneurial podcasts as well as just different business ones. And I'm just sitting there, my head's just turning and spinning. Like you said, it puts you in that mindset. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I need that to kind of give me that reset button, especially when, as you and I were talking before this, you know, there's not enough hours in the day. Yeah. And sometimes you just get overwhelmed with things, and just to get you back on that kind of, you know, that track again, and get you that you know, motivation you may need, or whatever it is, to get you thinking in that positive mindset to keep going with it. But
yeah, I mean, that's kind of how I used to not think of it that way. I was always like, you know, let's give people information. But then like I started having my own experience where I was like, I'm not even using stuff that I'm hearing on some of these podcasts. It's more like I'm just thinking through, and it's giving me the opportunity to think through it. You know, which is important, because people just don't have enough time to sit and kind of think about the things that they enjoy. So if we can give them a little slice of that, then, you know, then we're happy to do it. But I want to do one more hard, awkward, not planned, very poorly transition.
All right, see you later.
Into I want to talk a little bit about mountain bucks now, man. Like, we've kind of covered the Alaska stuff. We've talked about elk hunting. And I want to talk about the OG, you know, the original gangster, you know, from your youth, of kind of how you grew up, and talk about some of those experiences, if you would be so kind as to indulge me. So first, I want to get a sense. Like, I know you kind of said at the upfront, Allegheny Forest, that's kind of the area you grew up in. So is most of the places that you're deer hunting here in the East, are those public land places for the most part?
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah. And there's also a lot of lands that I hunt that are privately owned, public access logging. You know, logging companies may own it, forester companies, gas companies. There's a bunch of different ways, especially in Pennsylvania and even in Ohio, that are owned by different companies that are private lands but public access. So a mix of those.
Yeah. And so is it predominantly like big woods, would you say?
Yeah. Actually, there's not any areas that I'm hunting right now that have an ag field within miles. So
nice.
Yeah. So it's primarily big timber.
Okay. So I want to start with learning a new piece of ground, right? Because I think sometimes, you know, so I think I saw a stat from QDMA that said like 80% of, maybe it was 75, it was 75 or 80% of deer hunters, right, hunt private land. You know, and implying that it's like family owned, or that they own it themselves, or what have you. So I think sometimes when, you know, and a lot of that, as you can imagine, is probably agricultural land, or at least nearby agricultural land when you get into rural PA for the most part, you know. And so I want to get a sense. I think some folks, when they step outside of that kind of back 40 style hunting, you know, and this could be an adventure too. You know, you're stepping outside your back 40 and you're now going to go to a big wood setting somewhere and you're going to hunt. I think one place where that can be a little intimidating is that when you're hunting farm country, you can get a sense as to, like, especially early season and late season, you can kind of get a sense as to what patterns, how deer are going to move on a property, right? You'll kind of understand where the ag is. They're at some point going to feed there, especially if it's a destination food source. You try to figure out what their bedding is, their route to and from, and you should see deer. You know what I mean? And then if you go to late season, they should be back on that bed to food pattern. You know, if you go during the rut, there's a couple of different type of rut funnels you want to focus on, whether you're trying to focus on, you know, does coming back from food to bed, or, you know, if you're hunting scrape lines and so on and so forth, right? So there's a couple of different ways, but by and large, you're gonna focus on, like, bed, you know, and you're gonna focus on food to a degree, right? Because there's plenty of it. Whenever they make the transition to start hunting big woods, it's not as spelled out and as cut and dry as that, right? So you kind of have to do a little bit more dissecting, and and I won't answer, I guess, my own question. I'll ask you, what are you kind of looking for, you know, when you're approaching a new piece of land, public land, big woods type of setting? Like, how do you first start to dissect a piece of ground?
Okay, so, like, if I'm taking a look at a map, I'll look at an aerial map first and foremost, and I like to, like, say, for example, if you're using Onyx maps, I'll use the one where it has the topographic overlay on top of the aerial view, and kind of get an idea how the terrain runs. And by looking at terrain, it's definitely in you know, hill or mountainous type terrain, you can kind of see how the deer are going to use the land. And so once I kind of look at that and kind of getting a feel for how the property flows together, then I'm looking for changes in that terrain. Okay, looks like you can kind of tell, all right, that looks like it's an area of hemlock or pine trees that has a hard edge against what may look like that was a logging clear cut. If you're on federally owned land, Onyx will show you actually if it was logged and when it was logged. So that really helps from a standpoint of knowing how old it is and how the deer will use it. But anyways, so I'm looking at, like, the differences in terrain. I'm kind of marking different things. I love hard edges. Deer are, you know, a creature of walking on edges. So I'm looking for, you know, old clear cuts that may be really thick. I'm looking for new clear cuts that may be, you know, good food for them on the new browse that's coming up. And then also really looking at the way the streams flow throughout the property. So, you know, it's not really popular for people to say that they're going to hunt creek bottoms because of the wind, with it being inconsistent. But you give me a good creek bottom in you know, northern Pennsylvania in the rut, and that's where I'm going to sit every day. You know, I love it. I love creek bottoms for travel corridors during the rut in the big woods. So I always pay attention to them. And as I'm looking at these, you know, these creek bottoms, I'm looking for disruptions in it. Beaver ponds are my absolute favorite thing to look for. So, and again, I'm just giving you a high level overview right now. These are things I'm marking. You know, I'm just putting dropping pins, kind of, you know, looking at things so that when I put boots on the ground, I can have a better idea for it. So if you're able to put boots on the ground, which if it's within, you know, 5-hour drive, I would definitely try to figure that out, at least in the spring or after the season ends, so you get a little bit better of a, you know, a view or an outlook on it and be able to see some of last year's sign. Go through, check, and go to those areas, because otherwise, if you look at a map of the big woods, it's overwhelming, and you'll never be able to cover all the land that's there. So just finding these little features. So I'm looking for, again, new clear cuts. And the reason why, and again, I'm kind of being a little bit biased to a lot of the areas I hunt have no oak trees or anything, so there's not any acorns. If I'm hunting somewhere where that's at, I'm looking for that big timber that may potentially be points that have oaks, and I'm going to go check that out. If so, then it's boots on the ground type scenario after that. So I have the food, marked what could be potential food, which, as Clint, as I'm sure you figured out by hunting the big woods, and anybody else that has, they'll feed everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, anything's open game for them to eat. So there's no, cornfield, there's no bean field, but they do have primary areas that they like to feed, if possible. So I'm looking at that. I'm looking at water sources and travel corridors, which can be creek bottoms. One thing I didn't cover was like saddles on ridges. If something's a really steep terrain, I always look at saddles, as well as the points of hills when they go out, like overlooking the valley. If you usually go right over the edge of that point, in if you look at like a scent cone that's going out, so anywhere from left or right on that point, usually you'll find a buck bed out on that point. But that's only in pretty steep country. If it's not all big woods is really steep, so that's hard to tell. But anyways, I look for those type of things, mark them down, head out, boots on the ground, scout, and I usually couple it with shed hunting, as you and I talked earlier. But I'm like you, and I'm a deer hunter before I'm a shed hunter. So when I'm out looking, I'm looking for how I'm going to hunt the next year, and I'm checking all of these areas out for sign, and trying to figure out, okay, does this bed look like it's something that's used just right now in the summertime, or is this something that's being used in the fall? What would be the reason? And try to put together all these things that you had done from the scouting online before you walk into the woods.
Yeah.
So it's not a cut and dry plan. I mean, I can't say that I have 5 things that I go in and do every single time. It's absolutely not the case. It's kind of, you've got to come up with a plan, mark those areas, go in, and when you get boots on the ground, you will figure out if your assumptions are right, and if they're not, then you need to adapt to it and move with it, and really understand how they're using the lay of the land in those scenarios. So like you had touched on a little bit earlier, deer and animals in this, this forested terrain act as natural as it gets.
Yep.
They're not manipulated by anything. And again, there's nothing, and in my opinion, there's nothing wrong with any different type of whitetail hunting in every, different habitat. It's just different, and it's just as natural as it gets from a movement standpoint. So
yeah. No, I was going to say 100% agree with you, man. It's like when you get into those bigger wood settings, they're seeing less people because it's harder to find them. You know what I mean? You're usually dealing with probably, lower deer density because you're not in an agricultural area, and there's not, food out the wazoo for them to eat. And they're also, in my opinion, traveling on a lot longer travel lines as well, where it's like they're not going to make their normal route, like they would at a farm. Like every 2 days you'll see them pass through this funnel, or every 3 days, or whatever. You know what I mean? Like that distance is likely going to be a little longer because they are a little bit more nomadic. You know what I mean? Because they can feed everywhere and they can bed nearly anywhere, to a degree. The one thing I definitely dig on that you'd mentioned are saddles. I definitely look for those. I love me a good saddle. The other thing that this year, it's funny that you mentioned, because I've never found a beaver pond before, and I'm hunting near some water possibly this year. I found a good spot when I went out to scout in Ohio this past spring and saw some really hammer sign. We'll go back and see what shakes. We actually hung a camera near there, so we'll see if there's anything decent coming through there. But all the sign was kind of saying it looked good. It was in between 2 sets of doe bedding and looked to be pretty promising. But there, sure enough, was a beaver dam right there on that body of water as it kind of butts up to this small little stream that kind of runs into this kind of like swamp area.
Yeah.
And I just I saw that and all the beaver chews that were there and stuff like that on the trees. I was just like, man, this place just looks like just gnarly. You know what I mean? I was like, this feels like a place like a big old buck would want to hang out in. There's really only kind of one access is going to be the main thing on this because it's really only one way in and one way out to a degree. So access, it's going to be tough. But one of the first things I do, though, just for folks out there listening that maybe haven't done the big woods thing or, getting off the back 40 a little bit is, there's still possibility of pressure in places, any place that's close to a road or a parking lot or whatever. So it's like a lot of times I'll just kind of go through and mark off anything that I don't want to hunt. You know what I mean? Where I'm like, this is going to be easy to access. This is going to be easy to access. And this is going to be easy to access. And now all of a sudden I've cut this huge chunk down to 4 maybe spots, 3 or 4, areas that are places I would be interested to hunt. And then I look at all the terrain features you were kind of talking about and saying, okay, for the stuff that I like, does that exist in these 4 places? And then maybe it only exists in 2. Then I'm like, okay, so now I'm talking about these 2 spots.
You know what, Clint, you added a great point that I completely, glossed over there was first and foremost, definitely that will really narrow down your area is, looking at where the possible access points are and marking that off. So that was a great addition there. And I just wanted to give you a quick, kind of I guess a warning with hunting some of the creek bottoms, and just because I know of the idea of the area you're hunting in Ohio,
right,
is when you're getting in some of that super steep terrain with narrow bottoms, be careful with it. I haven't had as much luck hunting those type of areas in the creek bottoms as I have in Pennsylvania that may like roll a little bit into the bottoms more than, straight solid walls. I don't know what it is, if it's from, and I'll explain here a little bit how I use the thermals to my advantage, but it seems like, you'll find the best sign in the creek bottoms in Ohio. And again, this is from my opinion and my experience only, but I've only got nighttime activity like on cameras there, and sitting there, I wouldn't even see a deer a lot of times. So, but you found a beaver pond, and I'm going to tell you right now, you kill a deer 98% of the time. There's nothing else. The reason, this is why I say about beaver ponds, if you can set up as close as you can to them, one, they create a funnel. So it's, it spreads out the actual stream or creek that runs through the property, and it'll funnel the deer around each side because obviously it's a body of water, which makes it, kind of deep and tough for them to cross. Also, when you're hunting over them, especially during the rut, and that's what I focus a lot when I'm talking about big woods hunting, is the rut. So in the morning, the thermals, if it's cold enough, are automatically going to be going up. Heat rises as it's very cold, so your body heat and everything is going straight up. So creek bottoms are great right then, not bothering you. Your thermals are going up in the morning. As everything starts to warm up, the hillsides that have the sun on them first, the air is going to go up on those. So it's going to run up, and the ones that are maybe more shadowed, the wind is going to start coming down into the valleys. But if you're over top of a beaver pond, that water is always warmer than the air at that point. So if you're sitting there and whatever the dominant wind is in your face is blowing your scent in that beaver pond, it's just going to catch and draft up. So it's going to pull your scent up. And so even if something's walking downwind to you on the other side of that beaver pond, whether that's only 70 yards away, for the most part, and again, I'm saying this, with a grain of salt, they're not gonna catch your wind.
Right.
The buck I killed this past year in Pennsylvania was just set up, sitting over a beaver pond, probably 20 yards away, wind blowing down into the beaver pond, and that buck came straight downwind to me on the other side of the beaver pond, never smelled me, rubbed a tree in front of me, and then ended up coming out into the opening at 37 yards where I shot him at. But
nice. So, yeah, that's the one thing I've been kind of thinking about, is how the wind and thermals are gonna play there. And you almost described it to a T. Like, it is pretty sheer, like on the opposite side of the water. So it's basically like it's a pond, I would call it. Like, it's not a lake, but it's way bigger than like a farm pond. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
It's a pretty decent sized body of water. And the beaver pond is at the one end of it where it has this little, like, it's not even a creek necessarily. It's just like a runoff, like a little stream, like a ditch almost, like the water's running through. And that's where they've kind of dammed it up. But you're right, it is sheer, right? It's not this rolling, like it basically drops down into this body of water. And then when you go around the one side of it, it kind of flattens out and then it starts to roll. And the only thing I'm hoping my saving grace is that there's a bunch of dough bedding on that back side where it flattens out a little bit. And there's dough bedding, on the opposite side of me. So if I'm sitting and looking at the body of water, and we'll just call that, in front of me is north, basically to the east and west of me is dough bedding.
Okay,
and
gotcha.
Once you get past that dough bedding, there's like a drainage runoff, or like it's either a drainage. It does look like it has drainage runoff, but I believe it was just over time it's turned into that. I believe it's a saddle between these two kind of ridges that are real close together, and that kind of runs up into this cornfield that's like a couple hundred yards away or whatever. So I'm hoping that it'll be a killer rut funnel is what I'm hoping, because I had the same kind of thought where I was like, man, this feels like this could be like a really, like you could get hammer pictures and they would be at night. You know what I mean? Like I had that thought. And then I was like, man, for rut though, I was like, I feel like this would still be a good rut spot though, because you're smack dab in between two sets of dough bedding. And the easiest path to get there is to run that bottom of that ridge next to the water. And I mean, there's a goat path just pounded in there. You know what I mean?
Well, no, that sounds actually, that sounds like a pretty legit spot. I mean, if you want someone just to test it out for you, let me know. I'll come, test out the wind for you so you don't blow anything out.
Right. So it's funny because like Chad and I scouted that out, and my buddy Tate was with us. And I kind of have my spot that I killed my deer. One spot that I killed my deer, is one of the spots that I'll definitely be hunting. It's like a coin toss who's going to hunt this one, because it seems like it's really good, and we all found it kind of together. Like we all kind of looked at the map, and all at the same time we're like, oh, just go over here and look at this. We got over there and looked, and we were all like, man, this is really pretty nice. None of us wanted to say, I'm going to hunt here. No one wanted to be a jerk. You know what I mean? So
yeah,
we'll see who wins the coin toss to hunt that spot. I really feel it's one of those places during the rut, if someone put their time in the stand and hunted that area, 2 or 3 times, like I feel like they would kill a nice deer out of there. I just, for whatever reason, it's just one of those places that sets up where you're just like, man, that's a killing stand. There's a location for a stand that's just like completely bulletproof. Especially with you talking about the thermals and stuff. It's like, it doesn't matter what the deer does. They're going to get shot before they ever knew you were there. You know what I mean? It's one of those types of,
is there a hemlock or a pine tree anywhere near there?
Pines. Yep.
Nice.
That was exactly, there's a, I forget what kind of tree it was. There's a tree that's not a pine that is right in front of a very large pine. And then a very small one kind of right in front of that tree that you wouldn't have to cut much to get really good shooting lanes through it. So like you're all covered up, like nothing, unless something happens and you get winded, like they're not going to know that you're there.
Yeah, you knew what I was getting at with that. I love getting in pine trees or anything like that, because you can be covered up pretty good, and from a motion standpoint and a visual standpoint, I feel like just so comfortable from not being seen in those scenarios.
Yeah, 100%. Like I just hung a set this weekend and trimmed up a tree I can either hunt out of a saddle in it, or I can hunt out of my stand in it. And it's an elm tree, and there's a saddle that kind of runs on my dad's property. I've never hunted this property. It'd be the first year. And it runs kind of like this little stream that kind of runs into these 2 water holes that are on the property. And then I put a food plot in this past weekend, and then it kind of runs up, if you kind of perpendicular to the little stream, it runs up into the food plot. And so I found this elm that was kind of situated behind this pine tree. And I was like, man, I can cut a shooting lane to this side of the pine. And then right out in front of me, I've got some cover too. And there's like this huge oak tree. It's just like all weird and crooked and nasty. That's kind of out in front of me. Too big to put like a stand or anything in, but it gives you a great cover. And I was sitting in a tree stand with my saw, was waiting to trim. And I'm like, man, where should I trim these lanes out at? Then all of a sudden, like clockwork, I looked on my left, and here comes 2 deer. And they just they literally walked the saddle for me to show me where they walk. So I got a dry run of like where they're going to go and filmed it. Of course, I just grabbed my phone real quick and filmed them. But they gave me like the perfect like visual of like, oh, that's what they're going to do. And so I cut my shooting lanes, and dude, they had no clue that I was there, bulletproof. And it was middle of summer, stinking because I've been sweating all day, and they had no clue that I was there. It's perfect.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
And that's another thing you were talking about, saddles. So in that steep country, that's where I focus on is saddles a lot. And so in Southern Ohio, the same, the scenario that I had, I'll talk through the buck that I had shot. In the rut, I was just from spring scouting. I noticed that there was a buck bed kind of out on this point, on the one side. So the saddle was in between the 2 points. And on the one point, there was a buck bed and a nice rub, out there. And the saddle that went in between them with almost like an old coal mine, pond on the one side, and the other side was a steep cliff. So it was a perfect funnel. And from my experience, the bigger bucks that don't always run like the top of the saddle. They'll run like just over the edge, so they're not, skylighted. Mm-hmm. And so I set up down over that edge, and it was big oak trees where I was at in this spot in Ohio, and I just put my climber up, climbed up the tree, sat there all day. Had a couple little bucks run right on the top of the ridge. There was like a little, almost like a grassy road that ran across the top of the ridge, about 20 yards from my stand set up, and they were walking that, and because how steep it is, they were eye level with me because I was down over the hill a little bit. And then the buck ended up shooting, kind of came on that lower edge and came up, and before he was even, I'd say probably 20 yards over from the top of the hill, maybe 10 yards over from the top of the hill, is where I ended up shooting them. And it seems like those deer use at least some of the bigger deer usually use those side trails, not the main ones that the does and the younger bucks seem to walk. But
yeah,
that's sure. But saddles, I love hunting them. They're just, like you said, they're a natural terrain feature. And when you get some super steep terrain or anything like a lot of the big woods have throughout Appalachia, I mean, it's a bulletproof setup. If you sit there for enough days, you're good. And you made a good comment earlier with low deer density, and most of the areas that I hunt, and this goes for Pennsylvania and Ohio, are relatively low deer density. Mm-hmm. So I pay attention to access a lot, mm-hmm. but you do not mess up an area as often as you will in some areas that have a lot of deer numbers. So I feel a little more comfortable hunting a stand more than once if I'm not, because for the most part, you're not blowing anything out unless, if you do, that's a different scenario. But for the most part, I'm not seeing enough deer blow any out. And,
right.
I guess that's what I'm getting at.
Right.
So you can be pretty adaptive with that, and you spend enough time in the stand in one of those corridors during the rut, you can do very well.
Yeah, for sure, man. Saddles are one of those things though too, where it's like, man, I run into, if you're gonna find people in like big woods or like big public land chunks or whatever, a lot of times it'll be, if it's relatively close. Again, we'll give that caveat because a lot of folks aren't going to walk far from where they park. But a saddle that's close to like access, and people will be in it because it's one of those terrain features that's really easily identifiable for people. On a map, they can understand what a saddle is. It's really, really easy. The one thing I will like to look for too is that like first hard kind of terrain break, that first hard like terrain line that you'll look at on your topo maps. That's another place where I'll kind of like to just kind of move along that terrain line. Just kind of scout along it to see what's there, because as you were mentioning before, it's like, a lot of times, the bigger bucks aren't going to want to run the top of a ridge or whatever, just from being skylit. A lot of times they'll work down the side of the ridge just a little bit. And a lot of times it's around that first like steep terrain break, you know what I mean? Where that like, or what you would call 1/3 down or 3/4 of the way up, however you want to frame it. Right. It's right before you get to the top. It's like a lot of times they want to run that. And if you run that elevation along a ridge, more times than not, like you'll end up running into some buck sign. You know what I mean? And that's a lot of times where they'll like to run. So that's another thing that I'll, try to kind of look for. That right there is kind of like the Dan Infalt special. I know he talks a lot about, 1/3 down on the leeward side of a ridge is a great spot to be. So I try to follow some of his teachings to a degree. But man, we've been chatting, dude. You and I can go for forever, man. When we get on the phone, we can talk for days, just about anything. We've been talking for like almost an hour and 45 minutes. So I want to be sensitive to your time, and I know you're out of town and have work tomorrow and stuff like that. So before I let you go, though, I'm going to ask for you to do me one thing, and that is give me a hunting story, something that's memorable to you, and give me every detail, where you were hunting, who you were hunting with, and get me from the truck till you get back to the tailgate.
Okay, well, I'll go back to a relatively recent hunting story from November 8th, 2017 to be exact.
I was going to say it's very specific.
I'll get down to times on this one. It's fresh in my mind, but I was I'd been hunting at that point. I think it was 8 or 9 days straight, all day sits in the stand, besides Sundays, because in Pennsylvania we can't hunt Sundays yet.
Yep.
But anyways, it was one of those. I was getting kind of a little bit frustrated, kind of in my head, wondering, am I doing something right? Or am I doing something wrong? What am I doing? Kind of overthinking things. So I'm driving into this stand. It's pitch black out, and it's just one of them mornings that feels good. It's frosty. The road's glistening, and I almost hit a very big 8-point that was standing on the middle of the road, just looking dumb at me. I'm like, all right, something good's about to happen. So I go down into my stand. I put my bibs and my jacket on at the base of the tree, climb up into my hang-on stand, sit down on the seat, realize I forgot my seat pad, because I pull my seat pads out so I don't get soaking wet for any of the stands that I leave up. And so I'm sitting on this cold metal stand and realized that that I was using Sika's Fanatic bibs, and they have the Berber fleece on the outside. They froze to the stand. So a little 4-point came in, and I was like trying to kind of just pretend that, it was a bigger deer or something I was, legal to shoot, and just, seeing how I would react if they were going to do that, make sure that he wouldn't see me. Went to stand up, and I couldn't get off the seat. Like, I was literally froze to the seat. And I was like, wow, well, this is, this isn't good. So anyways, that was right after first light. Anyways, got my pants away, broke from the seat. So I stood up the rest of the day, and nothing. I mean, it was nothing going on all morning. Perfect morning you could ever imagine. And during the rut, November 8th, everything should be going on. And I said, all right, at noon, I'm going to get down and check this camera that's on the creek crossing right in front of my stand. And I kept looking at it. I'm like, should I get down? I've had the situation before. I've been halfway down the ladder, and, a deer comes in. But I was just getting ready to pack up my stuff. And I said, I'm going to do one last, grunting bleat sequence. So I do a lot of blind calling. Mm-hmm. If I'm in like thicker terrain in Pennsylvania, if I'm in the big hardwoods of Ohio, I still do it, but I'm a little more careful with it because they can see further. But anyways, I just used a little bleat can twice, and then just kind of acting like chasing coming through, and gave it a minute. And all of a sudden I see footprints underneath the pine trees. So since I have a little creek that runs next to me, hearing them coming in just isn't going to happen because it's loud. And I see little hoofs underneath there, well, big hoofs, and I see a tree just being, just raked up and down. And then at this point I shifted my body a little bit, and I could see through the gap in the pine trees, and I saw tines, and I was like, all right. And I could see his neck, big neck. I was like, this is a big deer. So I grabbed my bow and just waited for him to quit putting on a show. And he came in with the hair on his neck standing up, just
nice,
looking for a fight, posturing up. And he went across the edge of this like switchgrass opening where it hit where it hits a little bit different terrain on the side of the hill. And I'd ranged that spot earlier to the edge was 39 yards, and he was a couple yards in front of it. So I drew back my bow before he hit that opening, and kind of just settled that pin there, quartering away at 37 yards, and shot that deer. And I ended up hearing him crash, and it was just like, one moment, 1 second can change everything.
Yeah.
And that just made my season. It was like after a long, time of hunting during the rut there, and because the rut is the time we all look forward to, but it can be either hot or it can be slow.
Yeah.
And I made it happen there, luckily, and got down to it. And got down to the buck, and just the biggest body deer I'd ever killed in Pennsylvania. I was just admiring over that nice, Pennsylvania 8-point rack, and was debating on actually quartering them up like I would do out west and packing the deer out, because I was kind of in a pretty nasty spot. But I really wanted to show everyone the body of it back at camp. So I was like, I'll just drag this out. I didn't have any cell service, but I was in the tree stand. I could get out a text here and there, and I was able to get one out. My dad had just left for Ohio to hunt, and because he'd killed a deer a few days before that. And my uncle got back to me. He's like, "You need any help?" And it's like, "No, I got this." And I was like, I just wanted to do it kind of all myself from the beginning to end. And I shot him right at noon, like I said. So, by 1 o'clock, I had him gutted, and I was starting to drag him out, and had to drag him through a logging cut that they just did, and still left all the tops down.
Oh, man.
No, thank you. It took me all the way till dark to get that deer out by myself. And I was literally, I laid there and just thought, like, this is it. I don't know if I can go any further, but no, anyways, I dragged him the rest of the way out and couldn't get him in the bed of my truck at all. I couldn't put the deer up myself whatsoever. So I found a bank, backed the truck up to it, was able to drag him in there. And the body was so long on it that I have a 5.5 foot bed in my Chevy, and he was kind of bent up in there. I mean, he's a big deer, and I was just so freaking pumped at that point. I got in the truck covered in blood, covered in everything you can imagine, just stunk, and couldn't be happier to drive back to camp, hang him up on the hoist, and skin him out at that point. So that was a long story, but that was my hunt, and the one that came to mind, right away.
Nice, man. That's a killer story. That was a nice buck too, man. That you last year's deer, and the drag too kind of makes it all, the story kind of all come full circle. There's something about dragging your own deer out, though. You know what I mean? Like, I'm kind of the same way. It's like if I can manage it, it's like I kind of just want to do it myself. And I tell you what, there's no better feeling than when you make that long drag and it's a hard one, and you hop in the truck and you're done. It's just like you're exhausted and you feel awesome.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But hey, man, before I let you get going, dude, why don't you let us know where people can find out more about you and more about East Meets West?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram. My personal page is at Beau Martonik. So that's just BEAU.Martonik, MARTONIK. And also you can find me at East Meets West Hunt on Instagram, as well as East Meets West Outdoors on Facebook. And then the website is www.eastmeetswesthunt.com. And the podcast is available on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, YouTube, really anywhere podcasts are found. And just search East Meets West Hunt. Look for the logo there. Check it out and let me know what you think about it. So I appreciate you having me on here, Clint.
Yeah, man, you bet, dude. It's like dude, you're a fellow Pennsylvania boy, and I always like talking to you. I always like spending time with you. Just one of these days we got to hunt together. We got to put that in the books and make that happen.
Heck yeah, we do. I would definitely be excited to do that. That'd be a good time, man.
And let's just plan it and make it happen. So thanks.
Yeah,
for
like you said, hold on.
Yeah.
you can't just leave it up to opportunity. You got to make it happen, right?
That's right.
Commit and do it.
So we got to. We'll have to have a call. We'll make a plan for a hunt, and we will just commit, and we will make that happen. Sound good?
Sounds good, my man.
Awesome. So thanks for coming on, brother. I appreciate your time. Beau Martonik, everybody. Thanks.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank Beau for joining. Be sure to check him out at eastmeetswesthunt.com and follow East Meets West Hunt on Facebook and Instagram. I'll place all the links in the blog post show notes as well, so you can easily find out what's going on with Beau. We'd, of course, like to thank all of you for listening, and if you haven't done so yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating. We'd be super appreciative if you would do that, and while you're there, go ahead and subscribe for the podcast so we make sure to deliver each and every episode right to your mobile device. And before we shut this thing down, we need to give a big shout out to our partners that continue to help us make this podcast possible. Wicked Tree Gear, Exodus Outdoor Gear, Trophy Ridge, Ozonics, Obsession Bows, Tecumani Seed, Glacier Coolers, Ramcat Broadheads, Trophy Taker Rests, and Dead Downwind. And until next time, we'll see y'all.
I ain't welcome anymore. Long time coming, if it all. It takes a special knowing to color for damaged heads, broken letters. Rationalize yourself in numbers, but I